Let's bring in the roundtable. Jane Coaston, host of the New York Times The Argument podcast, USA Today bureau chief, Washington bureau chief Susan Page, National Review editor Ramesh Ponnuru, and Atlanta staff writer Mark Leibovich, author of the new book, a #1 New York Times bestseller. Thank you for your servitude, Donald Trump's Washington and the Price of Submission. Susan, there's a lot of ways you could say that Liz Cheney has no path to a Republican nomination, the idea of a presidential campaign. Democrats will be reminded why they don't like her. But, I mean, take a step back. She is the face right now of opposition to Donald Trump in this country. What can she do with this new political organization?
Well, in the short term, she told you she would campaign against election deniers. She confirmed that means she'll be campaigning for some Democrats who are running against election deniers. She has the stature and the ability to raise money to have an influence on some of those races. And over the long term, who knows? Politics is not a straight line. Liz Cheney is 56 years old. She could run for president in 2024 or 2028 or 2032. Sometimes there are political figures who seem to be making symbolic stances. And you look back with the benefit of some hindsight and you see the influence they had on their party and on the country. I'm thinking Bernie Sanders, who not everyone took very seriously at the beginning and who had a great effect on his party. We'll see if Liz Cheney has a similar course.
I mean, you could say Teddy Roosevelt, who left the Republican Party, ran as the Bull Moose candidate, and then the party actually tried to recruit him 8 years later to run as a Republican again. Mark, what is your sense on the role that she has taken on?
I think she has been, look, I would say that she's unleashed, but she was pretty unleashed before the election. But I think she will be an extremely relevant figure in her party, I think, across the board. I think she seems like she is, one, committed not only to sort of take down Donald Trump, but to take down the sickness of her party. I mean, she seems to be going more broadly beyond January 6th at this point. She's talking about denial. She's talking about election denial, January 6th denial. The question is, will she go into like COVID denial or climate denial, things like that going forward? But ultimately, I think she's going to raise a ton of money. I think she'll get a ton of media attention. And I think that her place in our politics is solidified for the time being and probably beyond, next year.
So Ramesh, I think I know what you're going to say about her future in the Republican Party, but it was interesting in that interview to hear her sound for a moment like very much a conservative Republican. She talked about strong national defense, low taxes, limited government, family values.
That's right. And she, in fact, as a member of the House when Donald Trump was in office, voted with him more often than, say, Elise Stefanik, who replaced her in the House leadership. She just wasn't willing to be loyal to him to the point of overlooking his attempt to undo an election. I think that conservatism has gotten overshadowed. It got overshadowed during this campaign. It'll be interesting to see whether it continues to be part of her message going forward, because the more she concentrates on the election denial issue, the less those other parts of her agenda are going to come to the fore.
Because, Jane, when I was out in Wyoming before the primary, I mean, it was an explicit strategy that Liz Cheney had to get Democrats to register, which you could the day of the primary, to vote for her. And you saw a lot of that. I mean, the people you talked to that were voting for Liz Cheney were often Democrats. Are they still going to support her?
No. Because she's not a Democrat. It's interesting because I think that it's important. I want to separate two things. Liz Cheney is standing up against Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Liz Cheney is a conservative Republican. Those two things exist. But I think that we too often combine the two. Liz Cheney is still the same person who refused to attend her own sister's wedding. Liz Cheney's father is still Dick Cheney. And if you were alive in 2004, you perhaps recall that Dick Cheney was vice president to George W. Bush. I think that her conservatism is getting overshadowed. There have been lots of people who have stood up against Donald Trump. A lot of them have been Democrats, a lot of them have been liberals, a lot of them have been libertarians, a lot of them have been conservatives. She is perhaps the best well-known conservative Republican who has stood athwart Donald Trump. Sorry, Ramesh. But I think that it's really important to remember that, Democrats were not voting for her because they supported her conservatism. They were voting for her because they wanted to send a message to Donald Trump.
Well, there's another guy out there that's been trying to maybe be a more middle ground, Mike Pence. I want to play something that he said this week.
January 6th was a tragic day in the history of our country. The American people have a right to know what happened that day. And in the months and years ahead, I'll be telling my story even more frequently than I have.
Well, I mean, to be fair, he hasn't really been telling it very frequently. I mean, for a while, Pence seemed to be downplaying the significance of, he was downplaying the significance of January 6th. He's been a little bit more out there. What did you make of that?
I mean, it sounds like
Pence?
he's rolling this out gently. I mean, I think at some point, I mean, look, go before the committee. I mean, you know, he said he was waiting for an invitation.
And Cheney made it clear that an invitation has been extended.
Yeah, I'm sure. I was going to say it's not a surprise. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not as if like we're just waiting. He's sitting by the mailbox. I mean, this is I mean, he can do this. I mean, I just don't know how compelling it's going to be at this point because he's waited a long time. But I mean, sure, I'd love to hear. I think we all would love to hear what Mike Pence has to say about that day.
I think you're not giving him enough credit, and I say that acknowledging that Mike Pence was the loyal, extremely loyal vice president to Donald Trump for 4 years. But Mike Pence stood up on January 6th, and if he testifies before the committee, which I think now seems likely, that is another case where he is standing up at some potential cost to his longtime goal of becoming president of the United States.
I agree he stood up on January 6th, but January 6th, I mean, is a day that will live forever. And I mean, beyond that, I think it would be nice to sort of get the retrospective from him that Liz Cheney has provided and many others.
I mean, it's also worth remembering that on January 6th, people were attempting to kill him. It was like, it's not just his short-term political interest, but his short-term interest in staying alive. Like, I think that it's what Mike Pence is doing.
They were literally saying, hang Mike Pence. Yes.
This literally did take place. And so I mean, I will never understand why he is slow rolling this, because if people were chanting hang Jane Coaston, I would not be this nice. But I think that I think he should go before the committee, but I also think that it's worth, if I could send a message to him, it would be worth remembering that his loyalty to Donald Trump and his loyalty to the Republicans closest to Donald Trump has not been reciprocated at all.
But I have to say, Ramesh, though, if he comes before the committee, first of all, it can't be in one of those videotaped depositions where he's like sitting by his lawyer whispering in his ear, right? He has to be there at the committee, at the table, live testimony. If that happens, that will be a very big moment.
Yeah, that will be electric. I think it's interesting. Pence came out in defense of the FBI and its agents.
Yes, that's the other
this
thing.
week. And that, I think, that was a choice, that he could have fallen in line with the prevailing tone of the Republican Party, which is the FBI going after Donald Trump was an excess banana Republican.
Yeah.
He chose the other path, which I think is a signal, about what he might do with respect to the committee. But when you think about his overall political future, you've got to remember, Donald Trump put him on the ticket in 2016 to shore up evangelical conservative support. Evangelical conservatives support Trump more than they support Pence now, and you have to wonder what his constituency is.
It's an incredible fact. So, Susan, if you look at the polling right now, it looks like Democrats could pick up, I mean, maybe even a couple of seats in the Senate. No first-term president has picked up Senate seats in the midterms since JFK. Is it going to happen this time?
So history says it won't happen, but we have a situation with some really weak Republican candidates in swing states. We have a new poll coming out tomorrow in Nevada. Some people thought Senator Catherine Cortez Masto was the most endangered Democratic incumbent in the Senate. This poll shows her up 7 points, more than she's been before. Maybe it's a summer surge. Sometimes the party in power has a little better time in August than they have in November. We'll see.
What do you think, Jane?
Yeah, I think that history tells us that in general, the party in power has a rough time in the midterms, but history has never witnessed Dr. Oz's senatorial campaign and what a crudité is. And so I think that I think Mitch McConnell is right about candidate quality. I also think that a lot of the issues, look, none of us know what's going to happen. A lot of people are going to say they know what is going to happen. They are wrong. I have been wrong so many times before, and I'm likely going to be wrong right now. But I think that looking at each of these races, they are a lot closer than people would have thought in 2021, when I think a lot of Republicans thought that they'd be running on school closings and critical race theory, both of which seem like I'm referencing in movies that came out 30 years ago. Right. And so I think that we're just not sure what's going to happen, especially when you have so many people who are going to tether themselves to Trump to help them win. You have Ron DeSantis campaigning for Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, but you're also going to have Donald Trump campaigning for Doug Mastriano. You have a host of candidates who are endorsing other candidates who have voiced in Oklahoma, hardcore anti-Semitism. You have a host of candidates who seem to be doubling down on why people like Mitch McConnell are concerned about them. And it's interesting because this is, you see in the primaries, those are base elections. Those are, you want to get the most out of the people who already like you. In the general, what you are supposed to do is come across like a normal person. Yeah. And yet it just seems like with Republicans, they're saying, what if we just didn't do that?
But if you look at McConnell and when he says candidate quality matters, that's basically a slur. I mean, but who's to blame for candidate quality?
Although, of course, the idea that the candidate quality matters more in the Senate than in the House is almost a political science 101 kind of statement. It is impossible to argue against what McConnell is saying on that point. Whereas the House races, a lot of it is just going to be national trends, the makeup of the district. You've got your result. The Senate, if you've got a candidate who's just a bad candidate, it matters more. As for who's responsible, I think the answer has to be Republican primary voters, first and foremost, for those places.
Oh, you're going to say the actual voters.
Where we candidates
the people that nominated these people. Yeah. That's quite a statement.
Whoa.
But President Trump, former President Trump, did exert some influence in these races, and he did often for candidates who are weaker. Oz in Pennsylvania being, I think, the preeminent example of that.
I would add a few more, if I may.
I would add Mitch McConnell. I mean, look, he can just wash his hands of this by saying candidate quality matters, like it's like some objective thing that he had nothing to do with. I mean, look, he could have washed his hands of Donald Trump or certainly led a more vigorous fight to move on from Donald Trump after January 6th than he ultimately did. And when you basically empowered Donald Trump to be the leader of the party, which he and many of his allies in Congress and the Senate did, you allow Donald Trump to have outsized sway on picking the Dr. Oz's and the J.D. Vances and the Herschel Walkers of the world, which is what you're stuck with now if you're Mitch McConnell. So Mitch McConnell, I think, deserves a lot of blame.
And it's not just how the primaries have gone. It's the people that haven't gotten into the primaries knowing what those primary voters who are listening to Donald Trump would do. So, there was no way Larry Hogan was going to win a Republican primary in Maryland. There was probably no way Sununu was going to win, or he would have had a tough time winning a Republican primary in New Hampshire. And Ducey was going to face the full wrath of Donald Trump if he tried to run in Arizona.
Although we did see Brian Kemp.
That's the one example,
yes,
right? It's
right.
Georgia.
That's right. But, there are obviously specific factors in Georgia, such as the state's Republicans having seen Donald Trump tank the entire ticket up and down in January of 2021. That may have been a wake-up call to a lot of Republican voters that they don't want him selecting their candidates.
Now, Democrats still have to deal with something, which is the unpopularity of Joe Biden. I want you to take a look at a couple of ads that we've seen in two House races.
I was the only Democrat to vote against trillions of dollars of President Biden's agenda because I knew it would make inflation worse.
Joe Biden's letting Ohio solar manufacturers be undercut by China. But Marcy Kaptur's fighting back. She doesn't work for Joe Biden. She works for you.
She doesn't work for Joe Biden. So, there you have those are two Democratic candidates that are making it clear in their advertising. Right. We aren't with that guy in the White House. He may be a Democrat, but
Biden's popularity is lower than Donald Trump's was at this point in his presidency. And traditionally, in midterms elections,
in some cases, lower than Donald Trump's popularity now.
Traditionally in midterm elections, the president's popularity rating means a lot. The reason I think it means less this time is it's the popularity rating of two presidents. Because you have a referendum on Joe Biden, you have a referendum on Donald Trump as well. And you tell me, will Republicans want Trump to be out there campaigning in competitive races in October, or will Democrats?
Yeah, you may not see either, but it's interesting, Mark, when you talk to the White House about this, they talk about why they think the environment has improved. Gas prices are down, inflation seems to be going in the right direction. He's had some legislative wins. They don't mention the January 6th committee, Trump's legal problems. They seem to genuinely think that is irrelevant. Are they right? I mean, all this stuff.
Well, first of all, just the fact that they aren't saying it publicly doesn't mean they're not, secretly happy that Liz Cheney has,
No, but even privately, when you talk to them, they say that they don't think that the January 6th committee has had an impact.
That is true on January 6th, but I think they are happy to have Donald Trump's legal problems front and center for them. I mean, if nothing else, it is 2 weeks since that, search has happened that no one's talked about inflation. No one has talked about, gas prices and so forth. So if nothing else, it's I think, welcome distraction from things that, look, people aren't talking about maybe their legislative victories as much as they'd like to, but ultimately I think Donald Trump remains an asset for Democrats in the White House.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.